The data being presented here is the most extensive local Silicon Valley-based real estate data and most current available. We're looking at the first data slide. This is March 8th data, midnight through the 7th of March. So I'm through midnight on Thursday instead of midnight on Friday, as I had been up to this point in time. This slide is looking at the active inventory this week compared to the 10-year median. So you go back over the same week for the past 10 years and look at what the inventory was, and then compare the existing inventory right now this week to that 10-year median. And you can see that all the numbers for the most part are below 100%, which means we have less inventory than we typically do. The two major exceptions are both in San Mateo County and the San Mateo County coast with basically 135%, so a third more inventory than it typically has, and Redwood City with 40% more inventory than they have. Los Altos, Palo Alto is right at 101%. Everybody else is below 100%, so there's a shortage of inventory for buyers, and that's why the red color is favoring the sellers. And now we're looking at the number of offers. So it's the same thing, but the other side of the equation. This is the demand side. The first active listings is the inventory side. Now we're looking at the demand side. And you can see that basically demand is down everywhere except in Cupertino and Sunnyvale, where it's 6.5% above where it normally is. And what each supply and demand by itself are indicators, but the real key is the ratio between the two. So here's your days of unsold inventory, which is the ratio for each of the 10 years compared to that 10-year normal. Here, a lower number of DUI, which you have in every area except for the San Mateo County coast and Redwood City. A lower number is meaning that you have less inventory than you compared to the sales volume that you have. So it's favoring the seller when you have less inventory. When you have more days of unsold inventory, taking longer to sell everything, it's favoring the buyer, which is why it's blue in color. For the most part, we're plus or minus, and it's mostly 100% to minus 15%, and with the exceptions being San Mateo County. And in general, if you look at San Mateo County, I would say that's 100% or more, because you go from Atherton down to San Mateo North, which is only at 92%. Foster City should be bright blue. I don't know why that's not bright blue. I'll look into that after the meeting. Now we're looking at days of unsold inventory this week, not comparing it to anything else, just comparing it to my general rule of thumb that less than 6 weeks of inventory is a red hot seller's marketplace, and more than 11 weeks is an ice cold buyer's marketplace. You can see the vast majority of Silicon Valley is in a hot marketplace, and you can see the relative numbers for the area that you're interested in. The lowest number that I am seeing offhand is in basically Santa Clara, Willow Glen, Campbell, Cambrian, and Cupertino, Sunnyvale, and that's at about 17.5 to 18 days. Oh, just noticed it. Santa Teresa, Blossom Valley, and North Valley just above it is at 16 days. The affordable part of Santa Clara County is basically selling out everything that's on the marketplace in 2.5 weeks. And no, that's theoretical because there's new homes coming on the marketplace, but it's a theoretical objective measure of what's the market doing. Now, this is also on the speed of the marketplace, but this is simply looking at what the long typical successful seller is taking to sell their property. We're ignoring the sellers that come on the market and testing it and never sell. It's only those that are successful, and that's why it's a little tighter. Instead of going up to 6 weeks, I only go 3 weeks. So you have to have less than 3 weeks to be in a hot seller's marketplace using this metric. And again, you can see the bulk of the areas are a hot marketplace. And you can see the real difference, like in San Mateo County coast and Redwood cities, is even though they had a very long days of unsold inventory, so theoretically, if everything was selling at the same rate, it would have taken 130 days or whatever the numbers were to sell. But you come down here and you're only taking 5 weeks for the successful seller to sell. So that's saying that there are some people that are coming on the marketplace and aren't successful, that's increasing that days of inventory because that's an active listing, but because it never gets sold, it doesn't count as on my successful seller time frame to market. Now we're flipping over and looking at what the seller's doing in order to get the offer in. And what's happened to their asking price? Is it going up? Is it going down? And here, red number is basically anything from a 0.25% reduction and up, and I limited it at 0.5%. Now, obviously, their data is not limited at 0.5%, but I go saturated red at 0.5%, and that's why Union City, Fremont, and Los Altos are all the same red, even though they change from 0.6 to 1.1. And this means sellers are actually increasing their price. When does that happen? If the offers come in and the agent and the seller feel that they got accepted offers above the ask price and therefore they need to raise the ask price not to cause an issue with the appraiser. It could be a typographical mistake that I didn't catch. That would be a data entry error where someone listed a property maybe at 1,100,000 and they meant 1,150,000 or they meant 1,200,000. Those kinds of mistakes. I do catch some, but not all of them. And I have to catch them multiple times because every week is new, fresh data. In Redwood City, they're taking almost a 3% price reduction, which may not sound like a lot, but what you find out is very few sellers are taking that price reduction, and this is the average. So it's probably something like 20% of the sellers are taking a 13.5% reduction. Now we're looking at the frequency of that price reduction. So this is how frequent are sellers reducing their asking price in order to track the offer. And you can see Cupertino, Sunnyvale, less than 3% of the sellers. Down here in Fremont, 2.2%. Union City, Newark, 2.6%. Very few sellers are reducing their asking price. Foster City currently has no sellers reducing their asking price. But Foster City is a very small micro market area and is subject to a lot of data fluctuation. On the high side, the area that I'm seeing the most is Saratoga Los Gatos at 17%, followed by Oakland at 16%. So that's like 1 in 7 of your sellers or 1 in 6 of your sellers are doing a price reduction. Now we're flipping over and looking at what the buyers are doing. And the drawback of this metric is you have to wait for escrows to close. So there's a 4, 5, 6 week delay for most of the data in order to find out what the sale price is. The advantage of the seller price reductions is as more sellers reduce their price, it would say that sellers were over anticipating the marketplace. And so the fact that that number has improved dramatically recently indicates that the market is stronger than the sellers anticipated. But you can see overbidding is 9% in a lot of Santa Clara County. You go down into Berkeley and Oakland, and it's 9 and 15%. Berkeley has been, and the island of Alameda have been having the highest overbidding almost extensively. Foster City is worth noting at 13%, but again, that's a very small micro market area, and it's been fluctuating wildly in the last couple weeks. Here's the frequency of overbidding. How common is overbidding? So there's Foster City, since my cursor didn't move, at 100%. So 100%, every seller that has closed escrow in the last 5 weeks got more than they were asking. The lowest number I'm seeing is in Saratoga, Los Gatos, and Atherton. Both around 40% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. So in our worst micro market area, almost half the sellers are getting more than their asking price. In our best marketplace, 100% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. And that's always strikes me as a little funny in the fact that, you're talking about a big ticket item and you expect to negotiate, but here it's almost like you negotiate up instead of negotiate down. Here's the appreciation since the last 9 months of 2015. So April 1st through December 31st of 2015 was where my base was. And you can see that the bulk of San Mateo County is blue, a solid blue in color, with Foster City being only 29% appreciation. So you go way back to 2015 and prices have only gone up 29% there, which may sound like a lot, but that's almost 10 years. That's only 3%, which is still fairly good when it comes to housing because you're leveraged out. If you only put 20% down, you're getting 5 times return on your money. That's a 15% return on your money. But now go up to Pleasanton over in Alameda County and 114%. So you've more than doubled your money in Pleasanton, and that's the highest one, followed probably by Newark, Union City, and then followed by Fremont. And the trend in all these graphs, if you've been paying attention, is San Mateo County, sort of close to a lot of the job centers, is doing poorly, and your outlying areas, be it the far end of Santa Clara County or Alameda County, is doing well. And I believe it's all related to this concept of more remote working, or at least more flexible hours of when you have to be in the office. Now, instead of just following the median, which is the middle number down here in the center of the column, I also sandwich it and put in the lowest price that you'd expect, 10 percentile number, and also the highest number, the 90 percentile. Probably the higher price ranges show it better. So maybe we'll come down here to Saratoga Las Gatas. You're going from 2.2 million to 3.5 million. So that's an increase of 1.3 million. And then you have to increase 1.6 million to go from the median to the 90 percentile. And that's very common in what you'd expect with the bell-shaped pricing curve. And that is from the median price down to the 10 percentile number, the prices are more congested closer together. So the delta for 40% of your data set is a lower number. And then from the median, the 50 percentile, up to the 90 percentile, the numbers are more spread out. So you expect a bigger number. Here, this is not market conditions, but just where the expensive homes are. So here's your expensive homes, and the blue outlying areas are where the more affordable homes are. Here's a summary. You start over on the left-hand side, which is your different micro market area, or on the far right is your estimated monthly mortgage payments, assuming an 80% loan, 30-year fixed at the conforming rate nationally. Or here, if you have a price range, you pick what micro market area and you look across and you can see what conditions are. The first two aren't color coded up here on the top, aren't highlighted, because by themselves, they don't tell you whether the market's on fire, because you could have a very limited supply of inventory like we do, and a very limited supply of offers like we do, or very limited demand of offers. And your days on sold inventory, so the speed of the marketplace is in balance. And that's why these two aren't highlighted. They really aren't by themselves an indicator. The yellow highlights are leading indicators, things that are more telling you what's happening right now today. Is the market faster or slower than it typically is? How's it compared to my benchmark of 6 weeks? What is the marketing time? Is it greater or less than 3 weeks? Sell price. So these are sellers' expectations. And basically the concept here is if price reductions are rare and red in color, that indicates that sellers were either underestimating the market or at least in line. If they were in alignment, you have a stable marketplace. If they were underestimating and you have fewer price adjustments, then the market's accelerating. Only when you have more price adjustments and would you say the seller was expecting the market to be stronger than it really was. Now, people might think that overbidding both the magnitude and frequency is an indicator, and it is to some degree, but it's orange in color because it's lagged by the duration of escrow. So these are what the yellow is what the market's doing right now, where the orange are what the market was doing that 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. And then appreciation and sold price have nothing to do with market conditions, but are very useful information. Now what we're doing is taking those 20 micro market areas of single family homes in the 3 counties, and we're putting them in a blender and looking at them individually. And so here's your inventory, and your inventory is somewhere around 75% of where you'd expect it to be. Your offers are right at 80%, and that puts your DUI below 100%, and the number looks like it's about 87% of the level you'd expect it to be. A low DUI is a strong marketplace. Low inventory favors the seller, and low but higher than offers favors the seller. So we sort of have a strong marketplace. I mean, putting this slide up, it's hard to gather all the information, but the key takeaway is all these 25s. And yes, there's a couple 24s and they correspond with the light shaded. This is the offers compared to normal. And this is 23 up here because we're starting on August 23rd to go back in time. And then here's where we rolled over to January 24th. So I can't put both the years up there, but it's 23 into 24. So the dark blue means that we're having the lowest number of offers accepted in the past 5 weeks of any time in the past 25 years. And it's not by a small amount. You're 9% fewer transactions now than we have had in the past 25 years. Just a few weeks ago, that got all the way down to 81%. We were losing 20% of our previous record low. And, yes, people are starting to talk about it, but I don't think they're talking about it as much as it should be talked about. There's a huge lack of offers, but there's a huger lack of inventory, which is why the market's still on fire. Here is looking at the estimated PITI payments for the county, and this would be the three counties, Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, and Alameda County that I'm lumping together and calling Silicon Valley. This is the cheapest 10 percentile. This is the typical median home, and this is the most expensive. And yes, very few people have a $25,000 monthly mortgage payment because people that are buying the most expensive home tend to put more money down. And typically, once you get over about $2 million, it's hard to find a lender that would actually loan 80%, but I wanted to keep the formula the same. I did make one minor change on this graph, and that's the green dotted line, which is the current week, is up here. And I thought this was a good comparison because the dotted line here is where we were a year ago, 12 months ago. And now the same week this year is up here. The market's improved that much, which is almost as much of improvement as we saw through from the worst week last year to the best week. Basically, what this is doing, since a year ago, this trend was going up, you would expect this number to go up from here, and we're going to get up to pretty high numbers. We probably won't get all the way back up here to the best week we ever had, which was February 14th of 2022, but we're going in that direction. I'll step through. And what this is it's the sellers' price reductions. And as you go up to the red line up here, which you can see it's actually dotted underneath there and there, that was the best we had, because basically less than 2% of the sellers were taking price reductions. We're not to the, you right now, sellers, you come way back here, something like almost 10% of the sellers are doing a price reduction. So you have to come down quite a bit. And again, the reason this is on such a tight scale, I only go out to 17.5%. If I looked at the whole thing, it would be a line like the red line, basically a straight line and only moving right at the end. So I blew out the last 17.5%. So these are the 17.5% of the sellers that are doing the biggest price reduction. What does their distribution look for? And the real key is, as you up and to the left, you're improving. As you go down and to the right, you're getting worse of market. So I'll step through, see the huge improvement. So that was the peak last year, just about 8 months ago. And there we were bottomed out of about 10 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, really close. Now you're moving up the last 6 weeks dramatically. And there's the current week. So again, we went from basically, and it's harder to see now, this blue dashed line down here up to here for the same week, separated by 1 year. So a marked improvement in the marketplace from just last year. Now we're flipping over and doing the same sort of thing, but looking at overbidding. A couple exceptions that are noteworthy. Here we're looking at basically 90% of the sellers. We're dropping off the 5% that take the biggest overbid and the 5% that take the least overbid, because they're the extremes. And that's also where your data statistical fluctuations are for typos. Someone drops off a 0 in data entry and it looks like they got a huge overbid or a huge underbid. By looking at 90%, you get pretty accurate data. And again, I did the same thing. Here's your data last week, way down last year, or way down here, and up to the right is an improving marketplace. And the green dashed dotted line here is the current week. So you can see this current week is a whole lot better than it was just a year ago. And now we'll step through it and see the improvement. So we're at a time with rapid improvement right now, and then you stabilize. So I'd expect this number here, the green line, to go up dramatically. There's about the bottom right there. And now it's improving. And the purple was just 1 week ago. So there's 1 week ago, and there's this week. So you can see how you're doing the pretty major improvements. And what I'd expect is this to continue to improve. No, we're not going to get anywhere up to here, most likely, but you'll improve and be better than any time last year. And that's in the amount of overbidding. Now we're looking at the inventory, and we're comparing the inventory to the least number of inventory you'd expect, which is the lowest 10 percentile of inventory. The gray line is the median inventory you'd expect, so where you'd expect the market to be. And the blue line is the most inventory you'd expect, the 90 percentile. Right now, you're right around the 10 percentile of level of inventory. And then on the next slide, we're going to take this gray line, stretch it out, and say what percentage of the gray line is the purple line. So the answer to that is we're somewhere around 73% of normal level of inventory. And you can see that it fluctuates. This is just presenting the same data in different manner. You can see that, we've been having a low inventory basically all the way back since 2020. Even in 2022, when the market was crashing, we went from an extremely low level of inventory of 50% basically to 100%, but we never really exceeded 105, 106% of the normal level of inventory. So even though the market was slow and prices were tumbling down fairly dramatically, we never had a surplus of inventory. The last time we had a surplus of inventory was back here right at the end of 2018 and the beginning of 2019. Now looking at the number of offers, the same concept. Here, a low number of offers is blue in color because that favors the buyer, and a high number of offers favors the seller, and that's red in color. So you can see that the offers is below the 10 percentile, and that's why we're remaining a hot. The inventories was right at the 10 percentile, offer below, and then you go on to the next slide and stretch it out, and your gray line becomes the norm. And right now, your number of offers is 80% of normal. And you can see that because now if you go 80% and go back up here, and inventory is only 73%, you have 7% less inventory than you have offers. And that's why the market is remaining. And that's why it's important to really look at the data, because you can come up and present data and get wrong conclusions if you only look at a few metrics. Here's days of unsold inventory. This is the speed of the marketplace by itself. The gray line would be a completely normal marketplace. Red line would be a faster marketplace. You can see we're close to the gray line, but a little bit favoring the red line. So a little bit faster than we normally are. And Silicon Valley itself is typically a very fast marketplace. So here you can see on a percentage basis, you're somewhere around 87%. So 13% faster than you normally are. Here's that time on the marketplace. So this might be a slide by itself that's easier for a lot of people to understand. Simply, what is the typical seller that's successful taking to sell? And instead of looking at the median where the number jumps, I'm looking at the 75th percentile. So the seller that's eventually successful but takes a while, they're selling in basically 2 weeks. We can look at the next slide, but you're basically as fast as you'd expect. The concept is the same. When you take longer, that favors the buyer, and that's when it would be blue in color. So you come down here, and you're probably somewhere around 53% of the speed. So sellers are taking about half the time to sell that they normally do at this time of the year. Here's the seller's price reductions. So here, sellers are still taking more price reductions than they typically do, because that would be the gray line, and that would be the gray. And the gray line is a very small price reduction. And this is 100%. This is probably about 1/3 of a percent reduction. So something like their asking price is 99.7% of what their original ask price was, because so few sellers reduced their price. Here the data is a little bit more, but it's still probably at 99.5, so less than a 0.5% reduction. And in a cold marketplace, you're still at about 99. So very tight metric, rarely over 100%. There's a few times when it's been over 100%, but very rare. And here you can see that sellers are taking a little bit more of a price reduction than they typically do. Here's the sellers. Because we've been focused on all the sellers with the average, I'm now ignoring 90% of the sellers and simply looking at only 10% of the sellers that are taking the biggest price reduction. What are they doing? And they're close to normal, but they're taking slightly bigger price reductions than normal. And that's probably about 90 and a half, maybe. Yeah, probably close to 90. So they're taking about a 9.5% price reduction. Not a huge price reduction and only a small percentage, but again, it's starting to see, and you can see that when we were in the peak of the marketplace, right around February 15th of 2022, sellers weren't taking any price reductions. Even the sellers that were taking the biggest price reductions were at 100%, but you can see that's pretty rare. The red line is your 90 percentile, and it's typically around a 4.5% price reduction. Here's looking at the 10 percentile compared to the median. So right now, sellers are taking about a 22% reduction compared to typical, and that's a percentage of normal. So if your normal price reduction was 10% price reduction, a 22% price reduction increase would be probably 2.2%, I believe. Now we're looking at the frequency. How common is our price reductions? So right now it's right on top of the gray line and right about 9%. So typically only 9% of the sellers are doing a price adjustment. In a hot marketplace, that number gets down to about 5%. And so what it's saying is in a hot marketplace, even though hot marketplace, 5% of the sellers are reducing the price market. And in a cool marketplace, you get up to a third of the sellers reducing their price. Here you are, and even though it looked like it was right on top, apparently it's slightly above, with sellers taking slightly more frequent price reductions than they typically do. Here's the average overbid bid. So now we have to wait. So this is what the market was doing 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. And you can see that you're above the typical line, but you're way below the red line. So sellers are getting more overbidding than typical, but not anywhere close to what it was in a hot marketplace. And you go back to 2022 and you can see that you can exceed the 10 percentile number and you can go below the 90 percentile number. Here's on a percentage basis. So right now, sellers are getting about 2% more overbidding than they typically do. This is the frequency, how common is overbidding, and you can see you're just slightly above the normal number of sellers getting overbids from the buyers. Here it is on a percentage basis. You're up here somewhere around 8, 9% of the more of the sellers getting overbid than typical. And here is your price appreciation, and you can see the end of the year V. We're just about out of that V. What I actually thought was interesting was where the peak is, because we now know we're going to go from the valley to the peak. And where's the peak typically happen? The valley always happens right past the end of the year, and that's because the end of the year is when you have the lowest priced homes selling. And I think it has a lot to do with the demands on our social lives. But so that's very defined. The peak varies a little bit because here is about halfway through second quarter. Here's almost the end of second quarter. Here's right at the beginning of first quarter. Here's right in the middle of second quarter, probably middle, maybe a little bit later. Here's right at the end of second quarter. Here's middle of second quarter, end of second quarter, end of first quarter. So when will this turn around? We got a couple more weeks before we get to the first quarter, and the earliest you'd expect it to turn. But we're gonna cross over most likely, but we're not gonna get dramatically above the long-term appreciation line. Now we're flipping over and looking at each county individually. Santa Clara County is in the blue, Alameda County is in the gray, and San Mateo County is in the orange. That's the active inventory, so you can see what the inventory is doing in each one of the counties. Here's the number of offers accepted. You can see Santa Clara County is doing the best right now. Typically, if you go back, Alameda County is outperforming Santa Clara County. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. And San Mateo County is the least and always is because it's got the smallest area. Days on sold inventory, you no longer have to worry about size because it's the ratio. So Santa Clara County is the fastest. San Mateo County snuck in second place on the speed of the marketplace. And right now, Alameda County is the third and the slowest county, which is a little surprising. Time on the marketplace, the 75th percentile. Santa Clara County is the fastest. Alameda County is doing second best, which is sort of what I would have expected on days of unsold inventory. And San Mateo County was doing the worst. Now we're moving on to price reductions. And here San Mateo County is doing the most price reductions, and Santa Clara County and Alameda County are right together, and you can't tell the difference basically. Here's the frequency of price reductions. So how common are price reductions? Santa Clara County is having the fewest price reductions, followed by San Mateo County and Alameda County. So it's again surprising that San Mateo County is strong compared to Alameda County. And I'm not sure the significance of that yet because we have to see if it's really a trend or not. Here is your overbid magnitude. Here, the Alameda County has the highest magnitude of overbidding. So the buyers are coming in at the highest amount over the asking price. Santa Clara County is second, and San Mateo County is in third. Frequency, Alameda County first, Santa Clara County, and San Mateo County in last place. Here's the appreciation for long term since the last 9 months of 2015. Santa Clara County is the most appreciation. Look how rapidly Alameda County is shooting up. So that's incredible to see that kind of increase. It was below San Mateo County probably 2 weeks ago, and now it's significantly above. Other thing here that I found interesting, you come up here and you look at San Mateo County, it's actually gone down in the last week. And if you drew the line, there's a lot of the time when San Mateo County in recent history was above where it is now. You draw the line right at 1.8 million for Santa Clara County, and there's only very few periods of time where Santa Clara County had higher prices historically. Here is the same information on regular paper, and here the lines were adjusted. So what I was basically saying, in San Mateo County, this year is basically a wash. Here, back in 2021 and 2022, prices were higher than they currently are. And in Santa Clara County, it was only a small period of the time when that was true. And Alameda County is a little bit bigger than Santa Clara County, but not nearly as many places as San Mateo County. Here's the estimated payments for the 3 counties. Here's the actual raw numbers, so you can look at whatever county and whatever data point you're most interested in. And now we're leaving Silicon Valley and moving on to the Greater Bay Area, which is 13 counties, 5 regions. The first region is Silicon Valley, then the cities, the North Bay, then the Central Valley and the Central Coast. Here is the numbers right off the bat. And again, this is only through Thursday at midnight, gathered on Friday, March the 8th, instead of through Friday at midnight, gathered on Saturday morning. Now we're looking at the inventory of the 5 regions. You can see Silicon Valley is pretty much in the top group, along with the North Bay and Central Valley, because they're the 3 largest regions. And you can see that that's the order that they normally have. I would say that Santa Clara County is a little closer to normal than either North Bay or Central Valley, just looking at it. Now looking at the number of offers, very close together, historically close together, so nothing to talk about there. Days of unsold inventory, Silicon Valley is the fastest, and the Central Coast is the slowest. The other 3 are in the middle, and that's typically where it's been for a long time. You also point out again that from 2023 to present day, the x-axis is about double the length of what it is before. You can see how short a year is from 2020, January 1st of 2022 to January 1st, 2023 is only this distance right here. We're going from 23 to 24 is here. And I do that so you can see recent trends and you can see the 10-year history all in the same graph. It's an unusual way of presenting it, and that's why I'm pointing it out. Here's this price reductions. Silicon Valley has the least price reductions. Central Coast has the most. This is the frequency for price reductions. Silicon Valley has the least frequent price reductions. Central Coast has the most. Overbidding, Silicon Valley the most. Central Valley has the right tied with the Central Coast as having the least amount of magnitude of overbidding. This isn't the frequency. They're getting over asking price, but it's the least amount. Here's the frequency. Central Coast is the least there by far. Then you have 3 close together, and Silicon Valley has the most frequent overbidding at 70%. Here's your total appreciation. Notice the cities, the orange line here. It's way fallen behind. You can see how close everything was right up until the pandemic. And then in the pandemic, the orange line has been falling down and is remaining behind. And the Central Valley is sort of percolating up to the top. Silicon Valley has really shot up the last couple of weeks. Here's the median sold price for the 5 regions. As you'd expect, the cities is the most expensive, Silicon Valley, Central Coast, North Bay, and Central Valley being the most affordable. Here's the estimated payments in the same order. And with that, we've been talking about week number 10 here in Silicon Valley. You can get to the archives. The blue is the direct link to YouTube. You can type in the green, which is less typing, and I call that the root URL. You add 2024 Saturday morning at 9 a.m. and you get to the live presentation. You add in H for handout, 2024-0309, and you get the handout. It was up, and it was up actually early. I got it up about 8 o'clock. And any special episode. I never did post last week's episode, but the handout was out. If that does happen again, You can always get the data by going to the handout, so that keep that in mind. I'm open for any questions. Let me see if anybody's trying to talk to me. Not seeing any unmuted mics. I look at data that most people do not look at. I don't look at median or average days on market. Instead, I look at the 75th percentile of time of successful sellers. The reason that number is so beneficial is it tells only the sellers that price their home appropriately to sell. How long is it taking the long typical seller to sell? Not the seller that underprices it and has a price war that sells the first week, but those that price it a little bit on the high side, potentially. Buyers have to come in, kick the tires, make an offer. Basically, 75% of the sellers are selling quicker than that, 25% are taking longer than that. I also look at the magnitude of the seller price reductions. How big are the price reductions and how frequent are those price reductions in order for the seller to attract the buyer to write the offer? I also look at the frequency and magnitude of overbidding, not just the average. I look at the whole distribution, everywhere from the 5th percentile to the 95th percentile. So you see where 90% of the homes are. I leave out the outlying 5% because they're statistical fluctuations, they're input errors, and they skew the data. So I look at 90% of the marketplace to get a better feeling what the market's doing. I look at micro markets. I've selected 20 micro markets in Silicon Valley. A couple of them are very small, like Foster City, Redwood Shores, but a lot of them are large enough that they give you meaningful statistical data on what's happening in an area. Yes, that doesn't tell you what the value you should offer on a particular home is, but it gives you an idea of what the trends are, what the annual trend is. Also, I don't look at pending data. Pending data is biased based on the transactions that take the longest to close. The more difficult transactions impact the data for a longer period of time than the cash transactions that close in a week. By looking at offers accepted, every transaction counts the same, whether you close in a week or close in 10 weeks. It makes no difference when you look at simply the number of offers that are being accepted. I also look at weekly data, and the reason I look at weekly data is the real estate market is heavily dependent on weekend activity. Buyers go out on the weekend, properties become available for showing on the weekend, offers are then looked at during the following week. So there's a huge weekly cycle. That weekly cycle gets impacted by holidays. So if we have Valentine's Day and Mother's Day that positively impacts the real estate marketplace, or pretty much any other holiday negatively impacting the real estate market, that's important to understand. So instead of looking at monthly data, which even has a varying number of days of the week in it from one month to another, by looking at weekly data, I normalize all that. I also look at a real estate calendar year. My real estate calendar year starts on March 1st, and then I march forward 7 days at a time until you get to February 21st. And then instead of marching forward 7 days to February 28th, I jump 8 days back to March 1st. So you're comparing the same date of the year to the same date of the year. The drawback of doing that is that date of the year does vary. One year it'd be a Monday, then it'd be a Tuesday, then it'd be a Wednesday. But the huge advantage is when you have leap year, you simply jump forward to 9 days and get back to March 1st instead of jumping forward 7 or 8 days. So your data is more consistent. There is a little bit of a drawback, but it's far better than comparing January with 31 days. You don't have an even number of weeks and weekends in there. The number of weekdays and weekends vary from year to year. So that's a huge impact on the data. So I made a lot of decisions to make the data more representative of what the market's actually doing. I also look at simply the components, the active listings. I compare that number of active listings currently to the 10-year median. I look at the number of offers. I compare that to the 10-year median. I do the same with days of unsold inventory. In fact, I was the one that introduced days of unsold inventory, and that's the speed of the marketplace. And I simply look at the raw count. Basically, roughly speaking, anything that sells with a days of unsold inventory of less than 6 weeks is a strong seller's marketplace. Over 11 weeks tends to be a strong buyer's marketplace. So you can look at each one of those metrics individually. On median sold price, which almost everybody follows and reports, I also report the 10 percentile price and the 90 percentile price. That gives you a huge advantage because now that price points for each micro market is sandwiched. You know the lowest price point that you'd expect and the highest price point you can expect. I also look at the appreciation, both shorter term since the pandemic in 2020, but I also look longer term since the last 3 quarters of 2015. I was hoping to do a full calendar year, but I wanted a period of time when prices were relatively stable. And unfortunately, they weren't very stable in the first part of 2015. So that was the most stable price point I could find. So you can see whether buying in Alameda County or in San Mateo County has been a better investment over the long term. It turns out that because of the pandemic, it's further away from the job center, but that's, it's going to be different from time to time, and past performance doesn't predict future performance, but it's still interesting to look at. I also present the data on visually on maps so you can see the trends. You can see where the market is hot. You can see cool spots. You can really see it visually and you get a better feel for what's going on. Yes, when you get down to making an offer on any particular home, you want to look at a detailed CMA, but the micro market data gives you a better idea of what's going on. A lot of people report data by zip codes, but the problem with zip codes are they could be in different school districts. They could be too small and you have statistical fluctuation. In fact, even my smallest micro market that I can think of has multiple zip codes in it to try to stabilize the data. And right now we're having record low number of transactions, which makes the data more unstable because you want a large group. And that was sort of the mindset behind the micro markets, is trying to get a largest group that you could of geographically close and similar type properties to define a larger market so that you get better statistical meaningful data. Anyway, that's a quick recap of what I typically am trying to present on this data. I'm open for any suggestions on the people out there, the viewers, on what I should do slightly different, what I could do to improve the data, what metric am I not following, because the sum of all my viewers is greater than my knowledge, and I learn from you guys all the time. So I appreciate that.